May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Now we'll notice who's been paying attention. Has anyone noticed the sign outside? Does anyone know what it says? Yeah, everyone's going, sign? There's a sign out front? It says things? Really? It is interesting, I have to tell you. During flea market, we've actually had people stop to take pictures of our sign. It's fascinating. One side is just the boring stuff you already know, which is we're here at 10:30. But the other side usually has some quote or saying that gets changed periodically. And it says, the church is not a building. The church is a people. Be the church. And it comes from that hymn that we sing, right? The church is not a building. The church is not a steeple. The church is not a resting place. The church is its people. And then it says, I am the church. You are the church. We are the church together. And it calls us into that role. Be church. And that phrase might sound funny, comical even, but our sign is making a serious theological statement about what church is. It is not this building. It is us. It is each one of us as we come together. If, God forbid, this church burnt to the ground or was somehow transported out into space, we would still have a church here in Brimfield, Massachusetts, because we would be here. And our language, unfortunately, has kind of muddied things because we call the building and the people the same thing. But let's unmuddy it a little bit. And I warned you about this, so let me ask you the question that I said I was going to pose to you. Perhaps I postulate that it might be wise that we return to the early settlers' name for this building. They didn't call it a church. John, you cannot answer this question. You know the answer. You have a ringer over here, so if you all fail, you can phone a friend. What did they call this building before they called it a church? Meeting house. Exactly. Guess why? Guess what they did here? They met. I know, right? A little circular definition for you. But they met for church. They met for dinner. They met for town meetings. They met here. It wasn't necessarily just about religion. And I think it would also really shake things up if perhaps we reverted to the Greek word for the early church, the people, which was ecclesia, which is the ones called out. Don't you feel special now? You were called out. You are the ecclesia. As you may recall, many of the early churches, the churches that Paul and other disciples founded, did not meet in dedicated structures. They met in each other's houses. And to that end, it is probably important to digress a little bit and note that Jesus, while we call him the head of the church, he himself did not found any churches, meaning any specific communities. Nor did he attend anything that resembles what we would call church today. He faithfully went to synagogue like any good Jewish man would do. It was not until after Jesus' death that churches started to be established to celebrate the sacraments of baptism and communion. And even then, they weren't meeting necessarily weekly. And it wasn't until Jesus' followers came into conflict with Jewish beliefs that church really began to flourish as an independent gathering of Christian communities in regular spaces, at regular times, in regular places. We first hear of what eventually becomes known as the church in the book of Acts. Did anyone grab that and look for it? We are looking for Acts chapter 2, verses 42 to 47. Acts chapter 2, 42 to 47. Who is willing to read? Acts chapter 2, 42 to 47. I know this interactive stuff is tough. But I know my teachers in the room will agree that doing stuff helps us remember. So Acts, anyone have it? Chapter 2, 42 to 47. Ah, Ron, thank you. Okay, here, Deb. Would you read it for us?
They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. Awe came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved.
This event happens on the day of Pentecost, after Jesus has died and been resurrected and even ascended back into heaven. Church, though, as you heard it, wasn't much about the institution as it was about a way of life lived out in community. People coming together for a common cause, sharing costs and responsibilities, participating in communion and meals, lifting prayer and praise, and supporting and uplifting one another. It is actually said that the church has 4 primary purposes. Anyone have any guesses what they might be? What is, if you were to name them, the purpose of church? Praise the gospel. Praise you, that's right. The reading and repetition of the gospel, the praise of God. What other things is church for? Focus, okay, that's a good way to focus our mind from all the stuff going on and kind of bring us back to center. I like that, I like that. Community, the gathering and fellowship of the people together, absolutely, absolutely. Support on those times when you need to lean on someone, absolutely. Anything else? Christine, way back there. To do good works in the world. Absolutely. Prayers. Absolutely. Absolutely. There are actually technically, and different people have different ways of looking at it, 4 primary purposes of church, and you'll hear that all your answers come together in these places. One is fellowship, and like any good church word, it has a Greek word, right? Koinonia, fellowship, that gathering community that you were talking about. Serving, the mission angle, diakonia. Evangelizing, preaching, and teaching, kerygma. And celebrating the sacraments and liturgy and prayers like you're saying, the liturgia. In other words, telling, doing, being, and celebrating. Not one or the other, but all in tandem. And as the church, we are meant to be the embodied remnant of Jesus in this world. As I often quote from Teresa of Avila, Christ has no body but yours, no hands and no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks compassionately at the world. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands with which he blesses all the world. The only problem with this quote is that it's too individual. It needs the whole community. And so I suggest that we change it to say, Christ has no body but ours. No hands and feet, but ours. As the body of Christ, the church is meant to communally continue the work of Christ in and around the world. Activist and theologian Shane Claiborne says, what we are meant to do in the world as church is to turn death into life. We are meant to interrupt death in every form. We are to be the people of life. And I've actually heard it said that we are to be called the resurrection people. And to do this, to be the enactors of life in a world that seeks out death, we also have to be transformed. This is also the gathered church's job. We are to hear the stories, to work together to understand them, and then to implement them within our own bodies and within our community. We are to work together to inspire and support one another, to uplift one another, to encourage one another, and yes, sometimes to be corrected by one another in love. Theologian Marcus Borg says, churches are to be communities of transformation. This means communities of re-socialization. To be Christian is to be re-socialized into a different understanding of reality and way of life, to live in relationship to another Lord and vision, to be shaped by the Bible and by Jesus. And this is challenging. I don't know if you've noticed it, but it is challenging in our current culture, where individualization is held in such esteem, where we believe our faith is meant to be private, only to be mentioned on Sunday to people that already believe, and maybe a couple prayers here and there, where we have lifted up national pride to almost a religion of its own, where we continue to bow down to the almighty dollar, praising and prizing wealth and equating it with honor and prestige, and where we equate power with the ideas of domination and violence. Church, the true church, the people are meant to be a sign, as Daniel Migliore says it, a provisional manifestation of the reign of God. Let's call it a practice. You are beta. You are the practice group of what it might look like in heaven. And no church is perfect. We are really beta. We are a crazy experiment with a lot of, what do they call them? Not quirks. In beta, they have bugs, right? We have a lot of bugs in the system that need to be worked out. But we are supposed to point toward the kingdom that we seek. And if we can't live perfectly into it, at least we should look like we're trying. That is, considering the needs of the community and the so-called others, sometimes in front of our own needs. Giving up or sharing what we have so that all might get what they need. You heard in Ron's reading where they dumped everything out that they owned and shared. Living the way of Jesus and letting our faith infiltrate all of our life, not just Sunday morning. Welcoming and providing for all. Treating creation as a gift, recognizing the blessings that God's diversity brings and encouraging others in development. And then putting the ways of God above all, before all else, even if we suffer from that choice. Church really isn't about our salvation. That is, as many people think of it, as our keys into some future place called heaven. But it is for the salvation of the whole world. Not for tomorrow, but for now, for the here. The changing of a world into a place where it is like heaven. See, the church isn't so much for God as it is for us. Because the church definitely isn't a building. It is a committed group of people living out the gospel so that they might be transformed and subsequently transform the systems of the whole world. Not per se so that everyone becomes a Christian, but so that the values of Christ prevail in the world. As the people once asked Jesus, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and didn't take care of you?" Do you remember what his response was? "Truly, I tell you, just as you did not do it to the least of these, you did not do it to me." And he didn't simply mean bringing one meal once a month, or donating your old clothes in a clothing bin, or offering a prayer, a single prayer for someone in the hospital. Jesus was asking us to change the world. And for that, we need each other. church is the gathering and refueling depot for the people called church, so that they might be prepared and inspired to bring God's countercultural love out into the world. So may we be church. And may we be transformed enough that we might be bold and bring God's vision of heaven on earth out into this world that we all know so deeply needs it. May you all make it so. Amen.